What's up everybody, it's Metamyther. Today I'm interviewing Drew Schlesinger, who has been designing presets for instruments for literally decades. He has developed sounds for over 200 devices, so it's completely possible that you've run into his work without even knowing it. I love that the music industry is filled with these more obscure figures, and part of what I enjoy about these conversations is making folks aware of people like Drew. This was such a treat for me, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. You're a synthesist, a sound designer, and a composer. First of all, before we get into all the presets that you've designed, how did you get into music, first and foremost?
Well, I started back when I was 10 years old. We didn't actually have any music in our house. We didn't have a piano or anything. And it was seeing The Doors on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I was drawn to Ray Manzarek, and I said, you know what? That's what I want to do. My brother played guitar. He's a few years older. And I just started taking organ lessons and then got a band, played in a band. And just really my whole teenage years were based around listening to music, looking for bands, and then starting to hear synthesizers. I was like, what's that? And I was like completely drawn into that. And I would just go out and buy every record that I could find that had a synthesizer on it. And then I went to college and played music in a band. And that was pretty much, how it all started.
What was your first synth?
It was a Micro Moog in 1975, actually. A guy named Don Croker. Well, I went to Ithaca College, and Moog was in Trumansburg, which is, not very far away. And the Moog stuff was all over town. I mean, there was Mother Mallet's Portable Masterpiece Company, which played huge modulars and gave concerts. But I took a course with a guy named Don Croker, a music appreciation course, and I think it was in November he comes into the class with a prototype Micro Moog. And the Mini Moog was still pretty expensive. He showed it, and I went home during the holidays, and I said to my parents, I want to buy one of these. And they agreed. And we went down to a store called Cynthioli's in Philly, which is where a lot of people bought gear. And I bought a Micro Moog, took it back to college, and just started fooling around. So that was the first one.
Before you had bought that synth, I know you didn't have a piano at home, but did you have some sort of beginning theory kind of stuff? Or
basic, just learning what chords are. I've never had any formal musical training. So I'm pretty much self-taught. I pretty much compose by ear and by feel, but it just wasn't something that was in our family. A lot of people have backgrounds where they come from a musical family, but I just learned and was just infatuated with rock music and synthesizer players and keyboard players. I mean, Keith Emerson, Rick Wakeman, all the greats of,
Sure.
In the early 70s.
Yeah, it was like at that time, I felt like everybody was really trying to design the grammar of what these instruments could sound like. And, Keith Emerson was doing a lot of stuff that was hearkening back to classical sort of structures and modes and stuff. And of course, Wendy Carlos, right?
Right.
What kind of sounds did you find yourself gravitating towards with the Micro Moog?
Well, I liked Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach. Obviously, that was like a watershed. And then hearing Emerson do his stuff. And then I heard Morton Subotnick. Mm-hmm. And that was a complete transformational change in terms of what synthesizers could do. And I was really attracted to non-tonal sounds. And then I started listening to bands like Roxy Music and listening to what Eno was doing on that first album. Bands like Hawkwind and Gong in the early 70s, 72, 73, 71. And those kind of sounds really, really struck me. And I was like, yeah, I want to make a sound that's a good lead sound, but I also want to explore these experimental, non-tonal, clangorous, weird, strange sounds, do processing. So that really was where I was drawn to.
Morton Subotnick too. He had like kind of a scene in like Lower Manhattan going on. Like people like from the Grateful Dead would like show up at his apartment.
Yeah.
Were you like connected to that?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't even really know where he was. I just heard Touch for the first time at a friend's house. This guy turned me on to Touch and Terry Riley's Rainbow Curved Air, and that really set me off on a adventure looking for other types of music that were electronic. Then I found early Tangerine Dream records. So I was really drawn to stuff that was more experimental, but still loved players, great players. Emerson, Wakeman, Patrick Moraz. I mean, there were so many. And I just really spent most of my time absorbing and listening. And Joe Zawinul, I would say if I had to pick the guys that really impacted me, it was Eno, Joe Zawinul, Morton Subotnick. Those were probably the big three.
Yeah. I mean,
and Keith Emerson from a more lead standpoint,
like kind of technical, like virtuosic standpoint.
Yeah, I knew that I was never going to play like him,
right?
But I could make sounds that got close, and that was cool.
I mean, I think few people can play like that. I mean, this is crazy.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
He really was, from a compositional standpoint, just brilliant.
So paint a picture of what the sort of landscape as far as the technology looked like, as far as, someone like getting into designing presets, right? Like lead us, I guess, like what did the industry kind of look like, right?
Well, at that point, you got to remember there was no internet, of course, and information was really scarce. I think the first magazine that came out was called Polyphony, which had interviews. And, if we're into synthesizers, you would be looking for any kind of printed material that had articles, photos. And then Keyboard Magazine came out.
Yeah.
And that became the real conduit to learn about what was going on, who the artists were, what they used. It was the first time you could see pictures of their gear. And I went to a lot of concerts too. That was the other thing. So I would see any band that came. I was in Philly and then in Ithaca, and they had actually a very active music scene. So I would go and see anybody and everybody that came through. So that's how I learned about the different types of devices, and just kind of absorbed it, looked at the back of the albums. Did it list what kind of gear they used? And then in college, I got access to the studio they had at the college. We had a Moog modular. So actually in Ithaca, there was a very large synthesizer scene because Moog had such a presence there. And there were so many artists that came through or still had played and knew him. So it was really just a confluence of events. And then I guess the major thing that I did was in 77, I believe, in the summer, I went to the Boston School of Electronic Music. And that was a 3-bedroom apartment on Dartmouth Street. Mm. And that was like going into synthesizer heaven. I mean, it was just a incredible setup of Moog modulars, ARP 2500s, 2600, mini Moogs, poly Moogs, EMS gear, an 8-voice Oberheim. And I guess that was probably the most transformational thing that I ever did.
That school doesn't exist anymore, right?
No, it burnt down a few years later. It moved to a house, and there was a fire, and it was run by a guy named Jim Mitchmerhausen, and he wrote the original ARP 2600 owner's manual. And he was the teacher, and he was an incredible teacher. And one of the first things he said that I never forgot, he says, a good teacher makes himself obsolete. And he said, I'm here to teach you what you need to know to continue to learn. And I still recommend the ARP 2600 owner's manual. It's one of the best books on synthesis. If you want to learn the basics, it's really well written. It's very clear. It's a great resource for learning about the fundamentals of synthesis.
Yeah, and especially semi-modular kind of stuff.
Yeah, because it was really based on the ARP 2600. He worked, I think, at ARP for a period, and the 2600 was pretty much the ubiquitous tool at the school. They had 4 or 5 of them, and that was what they used to teach the fundamentals of synthesis. And even to this day, it still stands as one of the greatest synths ever made, and the design is just brilliant.
What was his teaching style? Would he sort of, obviously it was a lot of hands-on training? Or
A lot of hands-on training, a lot of use of an oscilloscope and demonstration, theory of the harmonic series for different waveforms, how waveforms affected, how the harmonics in the waveforms would change, what the filters did. I mean, it was just really... actually, if I think about it, the most important thing was learning the differential between the audio path and the control voltage path and thinking about things as generators and modifiers. And once you start grasping that and you understand signal flow, pretty much every synthesizer is essentially the same. It's got different components, it's set up differently, they may use different nomenclature, but the fundamental concepts of audio path, modulation path, control path, triggers, etc. It's just the basics of actually most audio gear, regardless of whether it's a synthesizer or an effects unit. It's pretty much the same.
Right. I mean, that teaching sounds like really formative, and it really seems like you had a really good grasp on the fundamentals. So from there, did you apply for a job, or how did you?
No, I left college in '79, late '79, moved to New York City, lived in an apartment on the corner of 58th and Madison. Literally, my bedroom, one window looked out on 58th Street, one looked out on Madison, which was really a bizarre place to live at the time. And I watched the IBM building go up. That was during the Iran hostage crisis.
Right.
Funny enough, one of my neighbors was Divine from Pink Flamingos.
Oh, yeah.
Fame.
Yeah.
We used to go up and down the elevator together. And I was actually selling furniture for a family's business as a salesman, and I built a studio in the apartment that I had and started writing songs and recording. And I had built out a pretty robust setup with quite a few synths and a bunch of processing gear. I put out 2 cassettes locally, dubbed them in my apartment with friends' cassette machines, which are available on Bandcamp, I should just say, or at least some of the songs are. And then it really was I stopped. I met my wife. I got married. We moved in. And then it was in 1985, 86 when the Casio CZ101 came out. Mm-hmm. That was the beginning of the whole sound design career, because that was the first real synth besides the DX7 where you could create sounds, save your patches, and store them on a removable media.
Right.
So I started making sounds. I put them on patch sheets. I went to Manny's Music, where I used to buy all my gear, asked them if they'd want to buy them, or if they'd want to sell them, if they would take them and put them, for sale. They did. They put them in the window, and they started selling. They sold out of them. And then a company came out with a 64-voice cartridge, and all of a sudden I was making cartridges and selling them, and that was how the whole sound design thing started. And the CZ is still one of my favorite synths.
The CZ5000 was my second synth, so I know all about that. Like the phase distortion stuff is, I think, still really a novel kind of concept.
It is, and it really. I had a DX7, I had a CZ101, and I really gravitated to the CZ101. And then when the CZ1 came out, that was sort of like, that's an instrument that I really wanted to learn, and I was really. Took Morton Subotnick as an influence in that he just used the buchla, and he was intimate with that instrument and really knew it and focused on, learning one instrument and using that as his voice. And the CZ1 really became the instrument that I focused on in terms of the sounds that I wanted to make, because it could not only do regular sounds, but it really could do some really unique experimental sounds.
Yeah, very kind of like harsh and atonal kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and super bright as well. But then you could, kind of trim it back and make, these more kind of classic sounds. Yeah.
It was
Very versatile.
very versatile, really deep. The 8-stage envelopes, the ring modulator. So then I started doing sound design professionally. I could tell, if you want to know the story of how that actually occurred, I can try to do it quickly. Manny's was selling the cartridges, and they were doing really well. And there was a guy named Jerry Kowarski, who was the head of keyboards at Casio. He saw them, and there was a guy named Rick Stevenson who has passed, who was a friend. And Jerry said, "I'd like to hear the cartridges," and Rick refused to give them to him. He said, "No, you guys, you corporate guys, you're just going to steal the sounds." So Jerry gave him his card and said, "Have him call me." I called him. He got the cartridges. He really liked them. And then he invited me to show at the NAMM show at the Casio booth. I think it was 87 or 86. I'm not sure what year. It was in the summer. There was a NAMM show in Chicago. And all of a sudden, I'm standing at the Casio booth with a sign of my cartridges. I had a company called Synthetic Productions. And I started walking around and meeting other people. And through that, I just started getting entree into the industry. And then I wrote a book called The Insider's Guide to the Casio CZ Synthesizers. And all of a sudden, I had some credentials. And I just kept going to the NAMM shows and going to companies and saying, "Hey, I do sounds." And there weren't that many people doing it. I mean, Bo Tomlin was really the first guy who did it for the DX7. And I met people like Eric Persing at Roland, a guy named Danny Sofer at Kawai, and it just sort of steamrolled.
Yeah, that's great. You kind of already answered the next question I was going to ask, but it didn't seem that there was a lot of competition or a lot of people kind of doing this kind of thing, especially in the beginning. So it sounds like you got in like kind of at the ground floor.
It was luck and timing.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had Casio not in my back pocket, but that they had sort of given me credence and credentials by allowing me to show and working with them. Then I think I worked for Kawai was the next one, the K1-2, and just, I did good work. I made sure that I delivered on time, and it just steamrolled. And there were other people. There was a company called Sound Source out of LA. There was a company called Voice Crystal who also made sounds. One of the two of the biggest mistakes I ever made was not doing voices for the D50 and the M1. I had a D50, one of the first ones that came into Manny's, and that was when I got the CZ1, and I was like, I took off the chorus, I took off the reverb, I took off the EQ, and I'm like, well, there's not much of a synthesizer here. It's, sample attacks and a synthesizer, but the CZ1, there I could do a whole bunch of other different sounds. But I was still selling sounds as well on cartridges, so I didn't pursue that, and that was probably a bad business mistake, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It all turned out okay.
Yeah, exactly. I missed that whole kind of like Rompler generation too.
It was pretty amazing. I mean, what came out between 86 and 1991, I mean, it was just one expansion after the other. Roland with the JD 800, which is still a classic, and then the JD 990, and then the JV series, the JV 80, and Korg with the M1, the Wave Station, which still remains one of also my favorite synths that I use in software, and that still just astounds me. It was such a brilliant design and was so evocative.
Yeah. I had the MU Proteus one back in the day.
The Proteus one was really the first sample playback unit, right?
Yeah.
Hardware sample playback unit. So you didn't need a sampler, and a lot of people were buying, the Akai 950s and learning how to sample, but that gave you a whole bunch of sounds. I did a lot of work with EMU later, starting with the Morpheus, but they really had the whole sampling thing down. Of course, with the emulator, they just had a huge library, and it was really cool. It was all greenfield.
Yeah, and then you worked on some like virtual analog stuff. I saw that you worked with the Nord Lead 3.
Yes, I did a bank for Nord Lead 3, which still remains probably one of the finest, best designed synths ever, with the LED rings, incredibly powerful. It didn't sell well for some reason. I think it was originally distributed by Peavey, and then it was distributed by somebody else. And then the one that really still remains one of my favorites was the Korg Prophecy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was, now we're talking about 1996, 95. I think it was 95.
Which is when we're kind of starting to get into Ableton's right around the corner.
Yeah. The virtual analog
Yeah.
was really starting. Yamaha had the AN1X. Excuse me. Nord had the various Nord leads. So DSP was really becoming much stronger. The other one that really was a core of what I did all through the 90s was the Kurzweil when they came out with the K2000. Mm-hmm. That was a major instrument for me. That became, that pretty much took over what the CZ1 was for me.
Right.
And I really focused on that and did a ton of work for them, which was great. They were great people. They were incredibly brilliant, technically, musically, just some, I remember Pete Townsend at one point just said, buy a K2500, your whole life can be in there.
Yeah. So. Love that, because it's like, yes, especially now too, synths can do so much, and there's this sort of like gear acquisition syndrome thing where I like what you're saying about just having several instruments that you learn really, really well, and then it becomes like kind of part of your signature sound.
That's a personal belief that I have.
Yeah.
The gear acquisition syndrome these days, you look on Facebook, you look on Instagram, and there are guys with just humongous studios, and that's really cool. There's no doubt that each of the instruments has a unique flavor and a unique timbre, and no two are the same. Mm-hmm. But I always felt that I personally wanted to become really intimate with a few things and really try to push the envelope of what they could do and what I could get out of that, and mostly to make it sound my own. But conversely, I was in the business of making sounds for other people to use. And the instruments are pretty complex. We're pretty complex. If you're a composer and you've got a deadline, you want to get sounds quickly, and at that time you needed a bunch of different devices. Today, I could live with pretty much what's in Ableton Live and a few plugins, and I think I could do pretty much everything that I'd want to do.
Yeah, especially in Ableton too. The stock stuff is really, really powerful.
It's great.
Yeah.
The analog synth, the wavetable synth, operator. Yeah. And some great effects. They're really powerful.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like the Echo and the Roar plugin, like these are just really, really, they're just great.
Yeah.
The granular thing. It's like
all
incredible.
of it. It's a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
The other thing that I did a lot of I did a lot of effects design. So I worked with Lexicon, Eventide, and the company that I've worked with probably the longest of anybody is Sound Toys. Right. So I know Ken, who founded it when he left Eventide. He designed the DSP for the DSP 4000 and the H3000, and then went and founded Sound Toys. I don't know how many years ago, it was decades ago.
That's one of those companies that their plugin suite is really, really highly regarded. Like that was one of the first plugin packs that I just got the entire suite along with FabFilter, right? That's the other one. But yeah, I mean, I still use Echo Boy quite a lot. Like that's a great one.
It's a standard. Yeah. The effect rack to me is sort of like a nuclear power plant. That I could live with that, and maybe one or two other reverbs, but pretty much everything that I want to do or need to do, I can do with the effect rack. And if that was it, I'd still be very happy and still have plenty of area for exploration. You know, it's especially they just added Space Blender, which is a really cool reverb. That's really unique. So it's great stuff.
To go back to Eventide, you created something called the Black Hole Reverb.
I did. There were two presets that I did, probably that are of everything that I did and all the instruments I worked on and created. The two presets that are most ubiquitous are Crystal Echoes, which was for the H3000, which ultimately became the Shimmer effect. That was the first product that had that preset, which was a reverse shifter with about 500 milliseconds of delay and a bunch of feedback. And I'm just playing around, and all of a sudden, like there's this cloud of crystalline reverb echo came out of the thing, and I'm like, that's really cool. And that's how I met Eventide. I had called them up and asked them about the H3000, said, I'm thinking about buying an effect unit. Spoke to a guy named Gil Griffith, who was the sales manager. And I said, I'm thinking about buying a Lexicon. He said, no. You want to buy an H3000. And I did. And then I created a bunch of presets, and I called them up. I said, hey, I called you a while back, and I've created a bunch of presets. They're in Little Ferry in New Jersey, and I was in Jersey. I said, I'd like to come by and show them to you. And I went in and I showed them to him, and he said, I'll buy all of them. And then I started doing work with them. And then the DSP 4000 was designed, and Black Hole was the reverb that I designed one night, like around 3 o'clock in the morning.
I mean, Black Hole is like famous, It's like...
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's nice to know that at least two of the things I did have impacted people's creativity. I mean, as a sound designer, you wanna make sounds that people are going to use and be inspired by. And a lot of people have said that, that's one of their favorite reverbs.
Yeah.
So, and I had done a lot of reverb design, and I've been thinking about writing a book, and I've been toying with the title, The Visual Art of Sound Design, because it's really, I sort of see these things in my head, what I want to do, what I want to create. Black Hole was partially directed and partially happy accident. Crystal Echoes was a happy accident. But being able to think about, what is this sound supposed to do? What does it look like? How does it move? How does it change? What do I want it to do to either affect a sound, or how do I want it to appear when you play it? How does it respond? And what category is it going to fall into? But Black Hole was great.
Yeah. When you're designing something like this, do you have more or less the interface that, any user has, or are you sort of working on parameters that are sort of more like under the hood? Do you know what I mean?
Pretty much it's straight ahead designing right from the front panel. However, the DSP 4000 had something called a SIG editor, which was a PC-based text editor. And not only did you have to choose what modules you were going to use and hook them up, but you also had to design the front panel. It was the display. So I want a knob and I want its range to be from here to here, and I want to call it this, or I want a slider. So that was as close to computer programming as I ever came.
Right.
And I learned it, and it was really tedious. But it also gave me access to do things that I couldn't do on the front panel. But most often it was, here's the synth, make some sounds.
Right.
Nothing, no special tools than, same thing everybody was going to have.
Right. Do you send them sound examples, or do you send them like a file to review, like with clients?
The way I worked is I charged a fee per sound, and I say, you tell me how many sounds you want me to do within your budget, and that's what I will deliver, and I expect to be paid for the sounds that I deliver. So if it was 50 or 25 or 75, usually it was somewhere between 25 and 75, sometimes 100. Not that often it would be 100, but that way they could know how much of the budget that they had for sound design they were going to allocate to me. And luckily I had built up a good enough reputation that it wasn't on accepted sounds. It was, I'm going to give you 50 really good sounds. It's not going to be bass number 1, bass number 2, bass number 3, lead 1, lead 2, lead 3. Right. So I really made sure that I gave them a smattering of different types of sounds, pad sounds, lead sounds, bass sounds, orchestral sounds, whatever it was. And what I actually got known for was doing creative sounds, something that was unique, creative, not necessarily emulative. Although I was sometimes hired to do emulative stuff. I did a couple of general MIDI banks where literally I had a sound canvas here and another synth here, and I'm like trying to match it exact because that's what they want. At that time, it's what they wanted. But usually it's like, do what you do, which was great because it gave me creative freedom.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're getting potentially multiple sound designers, right? So different people got known for different things.
They did. Yeah. Some people were much better at emulative things. The thing that was really interesting is that at the time, again, this is pre-internet, I didn't know who else they were using. Now, I got to meet some people, but in terms of other sound designers, it wasn't until later that it really became clear who I was working with, and I became friends with a bunch of them, and I still am. So it was, it was a core group. It wasn't that big.
Yeah, but it's always going to make sense to get a bunch of people on just because everybody's going to have totally different perspectives and coming from different places musically. And, ideally you want to show the breadth of what this thing can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what the company wants to do is make sure that they put their best foot forward. And if something's designed to do a lot of different types of sound, I mean, an M1 could do tons of different sounds. But then let's say Roland came out with the JP 8000. Yeah. And that was, a virtual analog. So you were back to synthesis, but it had the super saw and it had a bunch of other abilities to modulate waveforms. So it was interesting that it really went from PCM, all PCM pretty much, to a hybrid of PCM and virtual analog or DSP synthesis. And you had companies like Technics who created an instrument called the WSA-1, which didn't sell well, but it was incredibly powerful. There was another one I was thinking of that I can't remember which other one that was really unique. Oh, Peavey. They also they were the first ones to make a Motorola-based, software-based synth, and it was really powerful. It was really cool, but they were Peavey, so people didn't really recognize them for being as deep into synthesizers as
Right.
Roland and Korg and Kurzweil, etc.
Right. Even today, it's not a super widely known name.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's not.
Do you have a specific philosophy as far as designing sounds? Like, let's say for something like the Moog Muse, right? Like there's just so much capability with it, and like you can like layer, two different sounds on top. Like, is it kind of, does the manufacturer kind of say like, we probably want to use like double sounds or.
Yeah, they absolutely want you to, or ask that you utilize and explore and expose the capabilities of the underlying architecture, right? I mean, it's when something like the Muse, which can do a lot, you don't want to do really simple sounds. However, they wanted both. And you kind of need both because sometimes really complex sounds are really cool when you play them, but when you try to fit them into a composition and an arrangement, they take up too much space.
Yeah, depending, I guess it's like, a bass sound might be a lot simpler than an evolving pad, right?
Yeah, right. And they will generally say, again, we want some bass sounds, we want some lead sounds, we want some comping sounds, we want some pad sounds. My approach was always to make them unique. And sometimes companies will say, we want some orchestral sounds, or we want, 5 of these, 4 of these, 6 of those. And I generally go back to them and say, look, I don't really work that way. I want to be able to be creative. I'm not going to give you multiple versions of the same sound. I'm going to make sure you get useful, musically useful sounds, but they're going to cover a lot of styles. And it's been successful.
Yeah.
You got to be a professional. You got to deliver on time. You got to make sure your volumes are right. Things don't clip. It's just, you need to deliver a finished product. And they know the difference, because they get a lot of stuff and sometimes it's not right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at this point, you've been doing this for so long that you sort of understand the brief as far as that.
Yeah. It's, I can't say it's like riding a bicycle. It's not, because actually sometimes it's like riding a unicycle backwards, and the thing that's challenging now is that things have become really complex. I mean, I've done a lot of software-based synths. I did a lot of stuff for Cherry Audio. I did some stuff for Arturia, for GeForce, and they've really expanded on the basics of what an instrument can do, even if it's a recreation of a device like the CS80. Cherry Audio had the GX80, which was really a cross between a GX1 and a CS80 with a lot more parameters exposed. It sounded amazing. That's the other thing. I mean, DSP is now in a computer, can make some really incredible emulative versions of synths that existed. Some companies try to do a very accurate recreation. Others give you lots of additional parameters.
Yeah, that's true. Like I downloaded a Korg Poly 800 plugin, and they have this kind of like flute sound, and it really just brought me back because it's like the first sound, I guess,
Right.
It's just this very clear like sawtooth wave sound. I don't know. It's a very like soft sound.
Right.
And it really just brought me back to like, decades ago. And it was like, they perfectly emulated that,
Yep. The software versions are really close. What some people notice, and it's factual, is that there's an effect of the D to A converters, the output converters, and how the sound goes through the analog circuitry at the end stage. There's a guy who just released a version of the Ensoniq DP4 effect processor, and I give the guy a lot of credit. It sounds really good, and he did an amazing job. Some people noticed, said, it sounds a little too clean. And he's saying, well, I can emulate the dirt, You want me to add the dirt? I'll add the dirt.
Right.
He said, I'll just make it switchable so you can choose. But
People want the dirt.
they want the dirt.
They want it.
And actually, that's a lot of what adds character to the sound. It's not just the raw waveforms. There's a company or a bunch of guys, I don't know if I should talk about it, but I think it's pretty ubiquitous, called The Usual Suspects, who are making true emulations of the Virus, the Nordlead 2, and they just released one, which is the JP 8000. And it's not a copy. It is the JP 8000. They shaved the chip inside and figured out actually how the code worked.
Yeah, I think for the Virus, I think it's literally you could just get the ROM.
Yeah, you have to find that the ROM is copyrighted, and you're really not supposed to use it unless you own the instrument.
Right.
But it sounds identical. However, it doesn't have the output circuitry that
Got you.
the Virus had, or the JP 8000 had, or the Nordlead 2. So it's essentially the instrument minus the sound of the dirt.
Yeah.
But you could add that with any number of plugins, to add a little bit of the grit, a little bit of the compression. You could always bit sample down, sample bit reduction, et cetera, et cetera.
My argument for the hardware, though, is it's just a lot more fun because you're playing an interface. I know that you can get like MIDI controllers to like control plugins and stuff, but it's just not really the same thing at all to me.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what people are finding is that human machine interface, the ability to immediately touch a knob and turn it and have an effect is software. There's always a distance between I want to and I've done. Oh, it's the mouse. Where is that parameter? Here it is. I've turned it. Whereas you could be turning two things at the same time on a Prophet 5.
Right.
And of course, some of those instruments just sound fantastic. The OBX 8, the Prophet 5. The interface is the interface between you and the machine from a tactile perspective is really important. And you do things that you won't do in software.
Yeah, definitely. Like when I'm recording something in, I'm not just going to sit there while the synthesizer records. I'm going to touch the knobs, or like if you have a reverb plugin, I don't really tend to touch that much. But if I have a reverb pedal, I'm going to play the reverb.
Right. You're going to make real-time changes.
Right.
And having the ability to do that, you can't do that in software. It's always, I'm doing a thing, unless you, like you said, you have controllers. And that's one thing that's really become much more ubiquitous, powerful, and makes things more humanized are the controllers that companies have come out with. Like Melbourne Instruments has the Roto Control, which is really brilliant.
Yeah.
I have a Nina. I did sounds for the Nina and the Delia, and that's like just fantastic. The ability to make a sound, store it, and when you call it up, the knobs are where they're supposed to be. Besides the fact that they both sound incredible, especially the Nina. I mean, 12-voice poly with the wavetable oscillator. That really, it's such a beautiful design. They really kind of hit the ball out of the park on that one.
Yeah, with that technology where the sliders like snap to the preset, it's like one of those things that you're like, how has this not been in there for like a while? I know it's expensive.
It's expensive.
Right? It's like one of those things that we just want and need, And
I think you'll probably see more of actually the company that made Nina and Delia. I believe they were in drone technology. The motorized knobs came from drone technology that they had invented. I don't know if they've patented it or not, but finally somebody said, oh, we can do this. And what's amazing is that the knob changes feel. It can be a switch. It can be an endless encoder. It can have steps, and it really feels like the real thing. It's not. It's not jerky. It's not funky. It's a knob. It's a switch, and it's great. I mean, it just makes programming a whole lot more fun.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's one of those things that it seems gimmicky, but then once you start using it, it's actually like super essential.
The people, when they first came out with it, that was the scuttlebutt was,
Right.
this is gimmicky. And then people would play it and say, wow, this really feels good. But more importantly, the instrument sounded great. I mean, it weighs a ton and it gets a little warm, but it's really, it's got a great sound. I mean, they really got a great Moog sounding ladder filter in there. And it 12 voices with the wavetable oscillator and real analog filters and VCAs, it really can make some unique and just beautiful sounds.
Yeah. To go back to Moog, I know we touched on the Muse. What was the working relationship like with that? Like, how long did you have to design sounds for the Muse?
It's funny that what happened with Moog, a guy named Eric Norlander, who I know from, I don't know, it's 30 or more years. I worked with him at Alesis. He was hired to become the product manager, and he said, I've just been hired by Moog to develop some new instruments, and I'm getting the band back together. And what he meant was sound designers like myself. There's a guy named Manny Fernandez, who's an FM expert and a great sound designer. He's out in LA, and a couple of other guys. And then ones I don't know, some in Germany and in Europe. And they got us a demo unit. And that was really an interesting project because it was being developed as things were going on, as the software was evolving. So it was like, okay, here's a new version of the OS. By the way, the envelope times have changed. So it was, iterations, but the thing just sounded so incredible and huge. It was fun to program. It had a pretty long gestation period. There are others where it's like, you've got 2 weeks. We want 50 or 25 sounds. Right. Got to deliver them by, this is the end date. So sometimes it's a short period of time. When that happens, generally the device or the software is pretty well baked. It needs to. They know that they need to have it right. Otherwise, they're going to give it to you, and you're going to deliver it, and they're going to change it and screw it up.
Right.
So
you also worked on the Moog Messenger, which I own, and I really enjoy that synth. How did you find that one versus the Muse? I find the Muse is a bit more polite, let's say.
The Messenger was really a pretty strong departure, where they added the timbre modification, wavefolding. Wavefolding. It was really an inspiration to work on. To me, it took me back to the Micro Moog. The downside, of course, was the names. It's like, okay, I made 100 sounds for that. And I had to be really, really careful that I didn't overwrite things that I had created. I had to be really careful about what sound was in what bank and keep a spreadsheet so that I knew. And also, that was one where they did say, we want a certain number of sounds of this type. And then I found there were certain sounds that it wasn't good at doing. And I said to them, look, guys, just give me some artistic freedom here. I'm not going to give you crap. And they said, no problem. Just do it.
What sounds was it? Did you feel like it was not so great at?
I'm trying to remember.
Because Because it is monophonic, right? So it probably doesn't do pads very well, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could do slow, as long as you're playing slowly. I think it was more sort of orchestral or realistic emulations.
Right. Yeah.
Like, give me some brass sounds.
Right.
And I'm like, well, it's going to be brass-ish.
Right. It's like that synth brass. It's like that sawtooth brass.
Right, and like you said, it's monophonic. So it's still hard to get that kind of articulation. But what it did do really well, and what it does do really well, is it can go outside, what I call outside.
Yeah.
And you really could get some incredibly unique timbres out of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty deep. I mean, it's not as apparent up front immediately of how deep that thing can go.
What are some of your favorite techniques with using that?
Oh, with the messenger, or just
just with the messenger. Just because I have it, so I want to know.
Geez, I'm not sure that there's anything that stands out other than saying I like to try to push it into the non-tonal category.
Because you can like assign the other LFOs and envelopes to like one other thing. So I feel like that's always like in your back pocket as a technique.
You can get, if I remember, it's been a while since I don't have one.
Yeah.
So this is all from memory, but you could get things, I think the envelopes could loop, and you can get them sort of this cycling thing, different kind of cycling things to happen. And I always try to, that's one thing that I do a lot, is multiple modulations. Like I'll often have a square wave changing the pitch of one oscillator in octaves, and another one at a different rate changing the second oscillator at, say, a fifth. And you get this constantly shifting stepping sound that's like very rhythmic.
Timbrely. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because Moog is always really good with that, because usually their pitch knob goes up like a fifth or down a fifth.
Right. It's funny. Really needs to be, I'm going from root to X or down to X. Some modulations, the way they work, everything just gets detuned, and you've got to find a spot where actually you end up detuning it down a fifth and trying to get it up a fifth. So it's not biased from 0 to N to a specific interval. So different companies do it differently, and that makes it challenging.
Yeah. You've also touched the steam pipe.
Yes.
Tell me about that one, because that's another great example of a super experimental instrument.
Amazing instrument. Gertz, who is Erica Synth, said, we have the steam pipe, and we'd like you to do some sounds. And that was a complete exploration of just tweaking. And you'd fall into a timbral territory, and you're like, okay, this is sort of indicating that it should be something like this. And then it was just tweaking the knobs until you came up with something that you felt was a really good sound, and saving it. And actually, that was a synth where I would save sometimes 5 to 10 versions of a sound, because you could switch one knob a little bit and completely lose the sound and not be able to get it back.
Right.
It's like, it was unintentional sound design and exploration, as opposed to saying, I want to do this and I want to get this kind of a sound. And I know that I need to do these steps to get there.
It's a completely different paradigm.
Completely different paradigm. You have the resonators and the way the filters worked. It was a ton of fun. But the frustration was, I can't say I want to do this and get there. So I would just keep experimenting and fall into these areas. I'd fall into, let's say, a plucked area, and I could get a koto, And then all of a sudden I had a struck bottle, not very far from what the coda was, but it was a completely different timbre, and it was just happenstance. The trick was, and actually this is a piece of advice that I would give anybody: when you think you found a sound that you like, save it, and then if you keep going, save it again, and then save it again, because you never know when you're going to go too far. And that happens quite often. You hit a sweet spot and you go, and then you're like, crap. It was good. It was five versions ago was the right one. And now I've just completely ended up with garbage.
That's just good advice in general. Save early, save often.
Yeah.
Like when you're working on, your own tracks and stuff like that. Do you see any kind of trend from your sort of vantage point on where gear is sort of going? I feel like there's a lot of like kind of gear with strange interfaces and not atypical interfaces, let's say.
It's actually kind of unbelievable. It's diverging like this. I mean, you have Soma Labs creating devices that are completely experimental, that don't have knobs or parameters that necessarily you would have on a normal synth. And the wooden one, I forget what it's called, that has the
Terra.
The Terra. That looks brilliant to me. I played it and it was incredibly expressive. The only thing I was afraid of was I'm going to spend a lot of time. Am I going to save the sounds? It's a beautiful instrument and it seems like it can do a lot. It's just a lot of muscle memory of what does something do. So to answer your question, a couple things. I find that instruments have shrunk the displays down to a chiclet.
Right.
And now you have devices with just LEDs.
Right.
Like I have the Roland Area T8, the little drum bass machine, which sounds great, but if I don't use it daily, I don't remember what combinations of buttons I've got to press. So that's a little frustrating, is either a lack of interface or a really small interface.
Yeah.
I mean, Korg made the Triton and the Kronos, and you have these devices that have really big displays.
Yeah.
But of course, you've got small companies. That's the other thing. You've got a million small companies, individuals in their home in some country, across the globe, coming up with something really cool, and they can do it. So I think there's a challenge for the end user to say, well, what is this going to be right for me? How do I know? I can't touch it. I can't try it. I mean, the one thing that's good is that a lot of stores have a return policy.
Right.
I know that Sweetwater will take things back, and but I try not to do that doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah. But it's like, if you're not visiting these expos, it's like you're not going to find them at Guitar Center either.
No.
So it's kind of like you're going by this like YouTuber's take on it, and I don't know. Like sometimes it's amazing how many instruments, like if you just have 5 minutes with them, you kind of instantly know if they're for you or not.
Absolutely. And with the modular stuff, I mean, and Eurorack, it's like, how many different oscillators are there? How many different filters? They're all different. I'm on a search for the perfect random generator to run with my EMS Synthy, which is my favorite synth of all time. And I think I've finally found the one, which is the Verbose random analog. It's his random module, which is built off of, or sort of like the Buchla Source of Uncertainty.
Okay. There's some some other stuff too. Like there's SSF has the Ultra Random Redux.
Yes.
Is that,
that's I had the Ultra Random originally.
The first one.
The first one. But again, it's like, okay, I got to be careful. I don't like buying and returning. So I bought the Verbose, and learning to figure out, learning it. And I think that's going to fill the need, along with a couple of others. Pittsburgh made one called a Gibbon, which was a digital module. And I just have a couple of small 4MS pods. I don't have a Eurorack system.
Yeah.
So I've got like 3 little pods, and I use them with the EMS, and I use it with the Erica Syntrix, which I love.
Which is kind of like the Synthy.
The Synthy. Yeah. They both of them, the Syntrix 1, which is much closer to the Synthy. The Syntrix 2 really is unbelievably powerful. I mean, it does things that the fact that the joystick is recordable, and
right.
And you can get various. Well, first off, there's no limit to the number of connections you can make. You get 3 levels. Really, just brilliant. I think Erica has really done some brilliant synths, and the drum machines.
Yeah, the Percons. Yeah.
Clearly, they're hitting a sweet spot with people.
Yeah, yeah. To close, let's talk about your personal music too.
Yeah, what little there is.
Yeah, but
So actually, I'm just going to diverge a little bit. I actually left sound design in around 2002, 2003, and went into the corporate world until 2019. And I had a bunch of music that I had recorded in 1978 with David Torn, who at that time was playing in a local band. He wasn't who he is now. And if you don't know David Torn, you need to listen to his music. I mean, he's played with David Bowie and so many other amazing artists. And he had bought an ARP Avatar. And I had a little studio in my apartment, a 4-track and a 2-track and my Micro Moog and a Oberheim expander module. Anyway, we ended up becoming friends. We played in similar bands, and we recorded all this music that sat for 40 years. And then in 2019, I called him up and said, can you listen to this? I actually think there's some good stuff here. And he listened to it. He said, yeah, we should put it out. So we picked a number of tracks. I think maybe it was 12. And he remastered it, and we put a CD out, and that was 2019. And that's when I started going to the NAMM shows again. So that album came out. And then in 1992 and 1993, I did a bunch of music just with 2 CZ1s, a Roland sequencer, and a Roland R880 reverb, all done in real time. And that was really my approach, that I wanted to sort of do what Morton Subotnick did with the Buchla.
Yeah.
So I created all these songs, and they too sat for a whole bunch of years. And then a woman named Amika, who's a very talented singer and artist and composer in Berlin, at the time she was in Berlin, saw one of my Instagram posts and said, I use Black Hole, I can't live without it. We became friendly, and I said, I have some music, you might want to hear it. And I played it for her, I sent it to her, and she really loved it. And she said, I'd like to put this out on my label. So again, it was some music from 1992 that I had created that never came out, and that's on streaming services. It's Lost Childhood Volume 1 and Volume 2. It's very ambient, but the thing that's unique about it is there's no overdubbing. It's all real-time recording of just the 2 CZ1s being triggered from the sequencer, running through the reverb, and going to a DAT.
Yeah.
So I had a guy remaster it and just level set it, do some final mastering on it. But the music was done when it was done. Yeah. And that's really all. And now I have a little setup in my computer with a couple of synths, and I'm probably going to start doing some more music. That's the next step, is to start taking what I've done and maybe trying to find my own voice musically again.
Yeah, I mean, I urge you to make some more music for sure, man.
I'm hoping to do that this year.
Yeah. Well, with that, Drew, thanks so much for taking the time, man. It was a blast to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, so much fun. And Hope to hear some more music from you soon.
Indeed.
For me, that was so fun to sit and talk gear, especially about an area of music I don't usually think about. If you want to see more chats like these, subscribe to the channel or support what I'm doing with a donation on Ko-fi, and I'll see you next time.